Welcome to The Bone, the podcast that goes deeper. Here we cut through the noise and get straight to the core of the issues that matter. From real stories to raw truths, we dive deep into the conversations that shape our world and challenge our thinking. We're not afraid to dig in and get to the marrow of it all. Whether it's life, culture, or business in sports medicine, we're here to break it down raw and real. No filters, no fluff, just to the bone. With your host, Shelby Daly, we're getting to the bone. This is a clinically pressed, approved CEU podcast. Find the quiz to gain credit at clinicallypressed.org/courses. Clinically Pressed Company, making the complicated simple through results that give back. Find out more at clinicallypressed.org. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Bone, the podcast. The podcast, it could be a podcast. We are talking about bods, but it's a podcast about everything athletic training. It is a multinational conversation today. We are broadcasting to you from Kenai, Alaska, 7:15 in the morning. It is dark, or I'd tell you what the weather is outside. And on the other side of the planet in Philadelphia, we're joined by the hostess with the mostest, Shelby Daly, the athletic trainer, whose idea it was to start having a conversation about everything athletic training. And from another country, dun, 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 we have Ashley Burr joining us from where in Canada?
Winnipeg, Manitoba, so right in the middle.
Right. Oh, the belly button of Canada. That's right. Yeah. Okay. Well, cool deal. Welcome very much. So today, obviously, we're going to have a little bit of perspective on there are ways that they do things in America, and there's ways that we do things in athletic training in Canada. And Ashley is going to provide us with a little bit of that width of perspective. So, Ashley, tell us a little bit about how you got into the athletic training game.
Yeah, so I guess growing up I had a lot of injuries, and I think that's how we all get into it, right?
Do we need to notify somebody to talk to your parents? A lot of injuries as a kid? Come on, man. Even in America, we have organizations that look into those kinds of events.
Did happen.
Oh.
And it was I just had a lot of injuries. I would fall and break a wrist or trip and break an ankle, and the most common one being stopping a swing while I was swinging, and I'd break an ankle. That happened twice.
Oh man! Have you heard of milk? It's got calcium in it.
Yeah, really. And so I just grew up kind of always being injured and being around that physiotherapy setting, and so that was something I always wanted to do. I was always interested in how the body moves, and then when I was in high school, we went and looked at different opportunities in universities, and I came across athletic therapy. So in Canada, it's called athletic therapy versus athletic training. And that just piqued my interest. I liked the idea of it more. I liked the idea of working with athletes or people who wanted to move, or and just kind of the overall feeling I got from the program. And so I applied. And
University of Winnipeg?
University of Winnipeg, yes.
Is that a good school?
It is.
Okay, just checking.
I have to say it, but it is. I quite enjoyed it.
Well, it's we have the University of Alaska Anchorage over here we have the University of Alaska, and it has various campuses. So I went to UAA, like, okay, is it a good school? It was for me.
Yeah.
All right, so you graduated from Winnipeg and decided to, what'd you do with it?
In Canada, we'll get into the certification process, but once you certify, you're kind of in limbo until you certify, and I assume it's the same in athletic training, where you graduate and you're like, yay, I can't do anything. So finally certified, and then I started up my own self-employed contract business in a clinic, which is what most ATs start out with. There's not a lot of large clinics that bring ATs in. So working in private practice, and did that for quite a while. And then I started getting into continuing education and teaching continuing education courses.
Okay, well, I lost my co-host. probably weather things, but so you've done a lot of continuing education courses
Yeah,
since graduation.
yeah. I really like taking continuing education courses and learning, and I think the comment was the amount of research articles that I've started to read in the past couple of years, and just absorbing them, and just I think it's important to take the time to read through it and sort through the research to find those connections, and continue the learning process that way, because you can take continuing education courses as many as you want, but if you don't understand the research behind it, you can't always apply it in the same way.
Yeah, definitely. So, in addition to your clinical work, you host the athletic therapy podcast. Also, what was the motivation behind that?
Yeah, so I teach a cupping course, I teach a pelvic health course, and minimalist footwear course. And last year, I was asked to come on a webinar and do a 45-minute, 60-minute talk, and I just felt really nervous doing that. I think the idea of talking and not seeing the people I'm talking to was weird to me, and I wanted to work on that so that I wasn't as nervous. And so then that was the idea behind the podcast, was to work on my public speaking skills when there's a faceless audience. And I looked around and there's not a lot of athletic therapy podcasts. So I thought I
Okay.
would focus it on athletic therapists or athletic trainers, and kind of what their stories are in getting into their careers, their career paths, and different continuing education courses that are out there taught by athletic therapists.
Okay. And then in your spare time, you like to bake, read, spend quality time with your husband and your son, and you have a few pets. What are your pets?
I have a cat and a dog. Lola, the dog, is 12 and a half, and Pumpkin, the cat, she's got to be 11 now.
I don't know if you guys get the jokes about having pet polar bears or pet moose like we do in Alaska, but just had to clarify for some people.
We don't, and I think that's just because most of the people I talk to are in Canada. But the colleagues that I talk to that are from other countries, they will make igloo type
Yep.
comments, or things like that. Yeah,
Is it always dark there? Is it always light there?
yeah.
Northern Lights, yeah, we see them all year round.
We don't see them all year round in Winnipeg.
Yeah, no, we don't either. Usually it's
Yeah,
mostly the winter, but
yeah.
that's the hot question of, well, if we have 24 hours of daylight, when are we going to see them?
Oh, there you go. Yeah, point made.
Like fireworks, when we have 4th of July, there's really no point in doing fireworks in Kenai, at least.
And I would have never thought about that. And I think that's just, if you take your critical thinking skills and put that together, you would just make sense of that.
Those are sometimes lacking with some people I'm talking with. But, well, let's get into the athletic therapist portion of the show. So, can you tell us what the process to becoming a certified athletic therapist is in Canada?
Yeah. So essentially, the process of becoming an AT is you find an accredited university to go to, and you complete their program. And then once you complete their program, you apply to be a part, or even while you're in the program, you can become a part of the CATA, so become a member of the Canadian Athletic Therapist Association. And once you've become a member and you're paying your fees, then you write your certification exam. It used to be a practical exam and a written exam, and now they've put that practical exam portion on the onus of the university. So a lot of universities will have an exit exam that's very similar to what it used to be, which was a clinical portion and a field portion. So all the stuff that we learn in first responder and working with athletes would be part of that exit exam. And so that's now on the university. And once you've completed that exam in the university and you've graduated, then you can apply for the CATA written exam. And that's, I believe it's now 300 questions, multiple choice, online. I believe somebody sits in and they watch you and make sure you're not, cheating. But yeah,
A proctored
and then
test.
and then it's weirdly a 6-week timeline from when you write this online multiple choice exam to when you hear if you've certified or not. In that timeline, you can apply to be a can't remember the term, but essentially you can work as an athletic therapist under supervision of a certified athletic therapist for that time period until you hear back from the Canadian Athletic Therapy Association to find out if you have certified.
Gotcha. So is it a bachelor's or a master's degree?
Yeah, there's 9 universities across Canada that are accredited for the athletic therapy program, and to become accredited, I believe it's every couple of years, they have to apply to maintain their accreditation to be able to have students go through this program and apply for the exam. And then, as I'm sure it's the same in the US, each university has its own set of requirements for being in the athletic therapy program. And most of them are a Bachelor of Science. There's one university that in 2023 recently switched over to a master's program, and that one is Université du Québec, Trois-Rivières. Apologize if my French is terrible. And that switched over to a master's program. And I don't know for sure, but some gossip on social media is that there's a few other that are applying to switch over to a master's program. So we'll see where that goes in the next couple of years.
So recently the US just fully switched over to masters. Do you, by chance, have you heard any gossip that you guys might switch over to masters too, or do you guys think that you'll stick in the bachelor's route?
I think it's something that most athletic therapists would like to see happen. I feel like there's so much involved in the knowledge that we need to have to be athletic therapists that it really needs to be more in depth. Our physiotherapy programs in Canada have recently, and I say recently, but I would say like 8 years ago, every program kind of finally was switched over to being a master's program. So I suspect that athletic therapy will eventually follow that, but that's just personal opinion.
Introducing HuTape, the skin tone kinesiology tape designed to help you heal while blending seamlessly with your skin. Whether you're recovering from an injury or needing some extra reinforcement, HuTape offers support where you need it most without compromising your comfort or style. Our tape is available in 3 versatile skin tones, ensuring a seamless match for all skin types. No more awkward mismatched colors or feeling self-conscious during your recovery. HuTape isn't just about looks. It's designed for high performance. With its strong yet flexible adhesive, you get the support you need without sacrificing mobility. Whether you're dancing or working out, you'll enjoy a full range of motion and all-day comfort. But that's not all. HuTape can be worn for up to 4 days. Going for a shower or swim, HuTape has got you covered. Find us at www.hutape.com and at HuTape_ on all social media platforms.
Yeah. Well, that's physical therapy just went to doctorate in the US. So it's kind of an interesting flow and ebb of where everybody's going.
Yeah.
So you had talked about the Canadian Athletic Therapists Association, which is your national association. Is that solely the only association in Canada, or do you guys have different subgroups in the provinces or territories that people are practicing in?
Yeah, so there's the Canadian Athletic Therapist Association is the national association, and everybody who's an athletic therapist or practicing as a certified athletic therapist has to be a part of that.
Okay.
You have to be a member, and you have to pay your dues, and that's where we put our CEUs through, and that's kind of who looks over us and makes sure that we're not doing bad things. And then each province will have their own association. There's
Okay.
I did quickly look into it. Now, keeping in mind, I'm not on the provincial and never have been on the provincial or the national association boards. So this is all just information that I have picked up over the last 15 years that I've kind of been interested in and in athletic therapy.
Yeah.
And so so each province has their own association. the Atlantic provinces kind of are grouped into one association, and I don't believe the territories have an association, so I think they just fall under the Canadian Athletic Therapist Association, and or maybe they fall under a province that's close to them. I'm not entirely sure on that. And so the reason somebody would be part of a provincial association, it would be based off provincial needs. So for example, in Manitoba, if we want to be able to work with clients who have been in a car accident or clients who have a workplace injury, then we do need to be a part of our provincial association, because the contract is through the provincial association. It is not through the national association.
Interesting.
And then we're not a regulated profession in Canada the way that, say, physiotherapy would be. And so all the provinces are working towards that. Quebec is really close to it. Manitoba's kind of getting there. And that's where I'm from, is Manitoba. And that's done by the province. It's not done nationally, just like in the US where it's done per state. And so in order to become a regulated profession in our provinces, we need to have a provincial association, and we need to have the numbers behind it.
So is that the same thing as a licensure?
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
Essentially.
Yeah. Well, that's where it's very interesting, and it's been kind of up to debate. Was we used to have our NATA, our National Association, which oversaw everything, but then we've broken it into 4 pillars to strengthen those different aspects of the national oversight, I guess. So we have the Board of Certification, the BOC, which is where we do the certification examination, and then we maintain our certification. We then have the National Association, which is advocacy, working with the federal government, which also the BOC does too. So this is very confusing to the U.S. athletic trainers, so trying to explain it to you is probably very confusing. And then we have the KD, which is the accreditation for the educational programs. And then we have a research pillar, the foundation of National Foundation, which they're in charge of like the grants and scholarships and stuff. So we have these 4 pillars that are supposed to be working together, which a lot of us aren't sure how they work off of each other to make it more efficient, but we are still figuring that out through this podcast. So it's still interesting to hear that you guys, I think, have a very close relationship to how we function in the US. But, we also have 50 different states where, not that you guys are small by any means, but your makeup is much more different, a little bit easier to oversight 9 instead of 50, and our international athletic trainers too. I guess, do you guys have international athletic therapists that you know of that work? I mean, we have a lot of athletic therapists that come to the US, but we have a lot that are on military base across the world. Do you guys have athletic therapists that do the same?
That's a really good question. I don't know the answer for sure. I would assume, because I think Canada, the US, Ireland, and a few other athletic training countries kind of have their own. They work together for that international athletic therapy program. So I suspect we have international athletic therapists in Canada. I know that one of my professors in university had gone over to work in like Australia and then came back to Canada.
Okay.
And so I suspect there's something going on there with that, but it's not a huge part of our members.
Okay. That was kind of an off the cuff question, so it's hard to keep track of your profession sometimes.
Well, and when I was first working, or right before I certified, I was working with a football team, and I had a international student working with me. And so I think that's part of that international association that is the same thing that goes on in the US. I would suspect there are international therapists.
So once you enter the profession as an athletic therapist, well, even in your educational program, what does the scope of practice look like for you guys?
Yeah. So if you go onto the athletic therapy website, it talks about the competency framework that was developed in 2020. And this was just to try and make things a little bit more clear. This is around the same timeline that they switched from the quote old style of the exam and certification process to the new one. And so the competency framework consists of 165 competencies. I'm looking over here so that I can read off my notes. And they're grouped into 7 categories. So athletic therapy expert, professional, collaborator, communicator, scholar, leader, and health advocate. And so each of those 165 competencies kind of falls under one of those 7 categories.
Mm-hmm.
And my familiarity with this is only because I take students in the clinic and I supervise them. And so those just kind of help the programs lead what they're supposed to be teaching so that when a student graduates from university, they've passed all these competencies and they have the ability to be an athletic therapist. So these are 165 skills that the CATA has decided athletic therapists need in order to work. And something like the athletic therapy expert, I would say that likely includes things like your therapeutic modalities, and how they make sure that candidates or students are meeting these competencies, at least at the University of Winnipeg, because that's where I take students from, is they will have essentially a book that they have to complete in their practicum placements. And it can be done where it's an assignment they have to hand into the professor or an assignment that they go through with their clinical or field supervisor. And so one of them might be explain to your supervisor how you can create a collaborative relationship with another healthcare professional.
Yeah.
And so that would be a competency under the collaborator. One that might show up under athletic therapy expert would be, have your supervisor watch you go through a spinal assessment or an upper limb or lower limb assessment. And then they go through it with them. And for me in the clinic, I'll go through it with a student and we'll talk about things. I'll try and draw out questions that I have for them to make sure that they have that competency. And then if they don't, then they have to repeat that competency. Like just, next week, come in, prepare for this based off the notes we've had, and we'll go through it again. Or if they've met that competency, then we check it off, we sign it, and they carry on to the next one.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
I think I had a post on LinkedIn a few weeks ago, and it was, comparing and contrasting the scope of practice between the US and the Canada. And I think it's interesting how you guys have a little bit more broader strokes on, your points of practice, where ours are a little bit more formulated. We got injury, illness prevention and wellness protection, clinical evaluation and diagnosis, immediate and emergency care, treatment and rehabilitation, and then organizational and professional health and well-being. I think you said it, but you guys just have one point on leadership. And I think that's an amazing, or from what I had looked at, and that's what I had brought up in the post, was how I think that's cool that there's just a leadership point and that it is important in healthcare. And I think it's important in progressing the profession also, is that we have a good understanding of where what direction we're going and how we're going to get there. For our 5th domain, we have the organizational and professional health and well-being, or it used to be like an administrative kind of point, and it just seemed very minimal. And even in the classes for that scope, it was, how do you do a budget? How do you create an athletic training room? Those type of things, which are very applicable. But I think leadership is a much more important route to be able to do those little things. So you guys have more of a broader umbrella, and I think it's cool because it doesn't lock you in. And I think even just writing legislation in the US, it could help us a little bit more in our scope of practice of even just patient population. Right now, we have a lot of legislation rewriting the verbiage of who we're treating, because it was very athlete dominant in sports. And now we're trying to open it up because we are entering the industrial setting, which we are saying industrial athletes. But as we keep progressing, that definition, we have to be very careful with it so that we can keep expanding into the general public too. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's like, we don't really, we'll work with industrial athletes, but more so in a clinical setting. So they might come to a private clinical practice to work with, through that workers' compensation board program, which is essentially you get injured at work and you can go and see an athletic therapist or a physiotherapist, and they can help get you back to work. But it's not as common in Canada to see, say, an athletic therapist at Amazon working with the program. And I'm sure it occurs in other provinces, but you don't see it as much as I've heard is highlighted on your podcast. So
yeah.
But with our scope of practice and all of those competencies, when you go onto the CAT website, there's 3 questions that they tell you to essentially ask yourself about if what you're doing is within your scope of practice. And so one of the questions is, does this skill fall within the scope of, within the core education of a minimally competent certified athletic therapist candidate or in Canada, CATC. And so if you look at something like acupuncture, no, it does not fall within the core education of a minimally competent athletic therapist.
Yeah.
But the next question is, are you trained in this skill? And so for myself, I am trained in the skill. So it's not something that I learned in university, but it's something that I took as a continuing education course. And the third question is the skill or act provincially restricted, protected, prohibited, or reserved? So the specific example would be acupuncture here, right? Where in Manitoba, it is not a protected or restricted act from the Acupuncturist Association here, because that's not a regulated profession in Manitoba, is my understanding. Whereas in Ontario, athletic therapists are not allowed to do acupuncture. So it's really based off of your province if you're allowed to do acupuncture or dry needling, depending on what the regulations are in that province. So we do have that really wide umbrella or scope of practice, but it's based off of those 3 questions. And so you have your, in university, we learn our assessment and our treatment skills. And so those will fall under every single therapist as something that's part of our scope. And if it wasn't taught, is it something we've been trained in? And then if we've been trained in it, we have to make sure that we're looking back on that provincial side of things and making sure it works there. And so one of the things we talked about when you and I met on the Athletic Therapy Now podcast was joint relocations. And so that's something that, at least in Manitoba, is not part of our scope of practice. So that would be something that's restricted.
Yeah.
We learn as far as, if the limb is compromised, as in there's no blood flow and no cap refill, then we can traction the limb. But we essentially have to sit there and traction it until the ambulance shows up. So more of a life or death situation versus the shoulders popped out of, and somebody's dislocated but they still have cap refill, we have to send them off to the hospital, or if a doctor's on site, they can do it.
Yeah. More, I think we do it for comfort and time and accessibility to that extent too, because we have people that are out in rural areas of the US and it's 45 minutes to an hour to get an ambulance there maybe, and then that to get it back to the hospital. So it's kind of to the individual athletic trainer on what they're comfortable with, and then what the oversight of the physician approves. Which, do you guys have to have physician oversight in Canada?
So if I'm working with just like the high school football team that I work with throughout the year, then I don't have a physician oversight.
Okay.
Every once in a while there'll be
written orders, I guess. Someone not necessarily there, but somebody that has approved what you can do. It's
not as clear as you make it sound in the US. And And so I suspect there are written orders, and that's just like, is it within our scope of practice? But I never have to speak with a physician over the care. If often in the higher risk sports, there will be a physician there, and then I can grab them and ask them if they have, if they can take a look at the athlete, or if it is a situation where there's a dislocation, then they can look at it and see if they can relocate it. But for events, when we have a large event, so if we have, let's say if we had the Olympics running in Canada, or if we have, Manitoba Games, or anything like that, then there will be a more structured tier where we do have a physician there, or access to a physician at all times to be able to work with the athletes. But the only time that it's very clear and where we can have those written orders, it's usually just if there is a large event, like a large sporting event.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Because usually in the U.S. we get written orders from our overseeing physician of what we can do, like when we're doing per diem athletic training, for liability reasons. And then, I've worked professional arena soccer, and our overseeing orthopedic never was there. So, I would consider those kind of bigger events because they're televised and all that stuff. But, I guess he trusted me enough to run the event, and, I was good at communicating with him. So he felt that he didn't necessarily have to be there. And I know that a lot of athletic trainers see that. Usually football games will have physicians on the sideline. But normally I'd say any other sporting event, not necessarily a physician right there. Usually just have to have access to them. And then obviously communicate with them on what do I need to communicate to you about on what's going on at the event. So, and I think it depends on which state you're in too. So there's that tidbit to it all the time.
Raise the bar in 2025. Complete your BOC certification maintenance requirements early. Don't forget that 2025 is a reporting year for athletic trainers. Are you on track to complete your BOC certification maintenance requirements? Find out today by logging into your BOC profile at bocatc.org/BOC360. That's right, it's time, and this year is the year to renew your certification maintenance requirements. Check it out at bocatc.org/BOC360.
But yeah, I mean, but at the same time, you guys can bill insurance too, which we are still getting to in the US. There's certain states where athletic trainers can bill for insurance, but I'd say a majority still can't, and that's kind of a hang up for all of us. But how does that usually work for you guys?
Yeah, so if I'm working, let's say I'm going to work with the high school football team, I'm not going through insurance on that.
Yeah.
Right? That's the school pays. They would pay me, or they'd pay the association and whoever set up the contract for that. When I'm working in the clinic, it is private practice, and so there are certain insurance companies that allow us to direct bill, and then there are certain insurance companies where the client has to pay out of pocket and then submit. But in Manitoba, most of the insurance companies do recognize athletic therapy, and most of them do have a fair amount of coverage for athletic therapy.
Okay.
It's a little bit different from province to province, but it depends on whether or not that insurance company is a provincial or national insurance company.
Yeah. So to maintain your certification, what does the continuing education requirements or recertification process look like for you guys?
Yeah, so to maintain our certification, we have to have paid our membership dues to the CATA, right? It used to be that you had to be part of your provincial and your national association, but now it's just your national association. And so you pay your CATA dues, and then you have to have your 21 continuing education units. and that's over a 3-year period. So what does that mean? Essentially, the CATA has broken it down so that for accredited, I'm using quotation marks, accredited educators, then each hour of content is worth 0.4 CEUs. And then for non-accredited education courses, it's 0.2 CEUs per hour. And so accredited versus non-accredited is a little bit, they just switched over to a new version of it. And it can be, it's an application process, and there's some frustrations over it among athletic therapists in Canada. So that's all I'll say about that side of it. But essentially, you just have to maintain or get those 21 CEUs, and it can be from listening to a podcast. If you listen to a 60-minute podcast, you can get 0.2 CEUs.
Yeah.
Or if you go to a continuing education course that is the length of 2-3 days, then you can get a fair amount of CEUs through that. And then we have to maintain our basic first aid, HCP, CPR. So that has to be done yearly, and we have to update our first responder course, BLS, I guess, and that has to be done every 3 years. Unless you graduated, I think the date is before 2020, then you do not have to keep it maintained.
Weird.
Unless your workplace. So there was a point where you didn't have to have your first responder or first aid unless it was required by your job. And so that, I think, was kind of directed at the athletic therapists that are working in insurance companies, which I assume is just kind of overseeing the insurance side of things and making sure that there's no insurance fraud based off of the charting.
Yeah.
And so somebody who works at a desk like that and aren't working with athletes doesn't really need the first responder first aid. So I suspect that's why. And then there was this is just based off of what I've seen and what I've heard through meetings. So I guess there was a certain point where therapists were questioning that and wanting it to be a mandatory thing, because as athletic therapists, that's one of our major competencies, and one of the big things that we do is sideline assessment, first aid, first responder skills. And so then that became mandatory again, that we have to update that in order to maintain our certification.
So for these insurance processor positions, is the certification needed for that?
If you graduated after 2020, yes.
Well, I mean, just your full athletic therapist certification. Do you need that to qualify to be able to work as an insurance processor, or is it just kind of helpful to do the job?
So I don't know a ton about working in insurance as an athletic therapist. I have some colleagues that have switched over to the insurance side of things.
Okay.
And I think they started as ATs. They started working in clinic or field, and then an opportunity came up and they took it. And so I don't know what the qualifications are to work in insurance, but I suspect having that AT background was helpful.
Gotcha.
And so if they want to still be an AT and maintain their certification, my understanding is that they have to follow all those things. And if they graduated before 2020, they don't need their first responder. And if they graduated after 2020, they need their first responder, even if they're just working insurance.
It's just an interesting caveat, because here it's, if you want to maintain your certification, you have to do the continuing education, you have to do CPR, you have to pay. I don't think they have like a temporary certification if you're not actively using it. If you want to maintain it, it's like all or none basically here. And that's where I think it's interesting that they're making caveats on CPR, because that's such a good skill just to have in general anyway.
Yeah, well, and I actually thought it was mandatory until they told us that it wasn't, or until they came back and they were like, no, this is mandatory now. I thought it was mandatory. So
Well,
I'm not really sure where that changed or why it changed. I just know that they brought it back as being mandatory. And I know that a lot of the, social media kind of conversation was, it should be mandatory because that's part of our job
Yeah.
when you start in athletic therapy is that first aid, CPR, sideline assessment, right? So
Yeah.
it's a huge part of who we are as athletic therapists. So
Yeah. Well, and I forgot, I was going to say it at the beginning when we were talking about the national and the Canadian athletic training associations, athletic therapy associations, was in the US, it's not required for you to be a part of the national association, which is very interesting. And that's why we're having some wavering questions happening. I think once they broke up into the strategic alliance, really you only had to be BOC certified. You did not need to participate necessarily in any other pillar of that strategic alliance, which is very interesting. And it's even to the state. I don't know if you actually have to be a member of your state association either, as long as you pay or as long as you maintain the requirements for in your state, because some you have to actually report your CEUs to where you're working and the national or at the BOC level also. So it's just kind of a mosh posh of like, I don't know what we're doing. This is why everybody's confused, because the standards are all different. As I was at my residency for my doctorate, they were talking about the importance of being a part of your national association if you get sued for some reason as an athletic trainer, is that if you are actually a part of your national association, it kind of decreases some of the liability ultimately, because it shows that you are a part of the up-to-date standards and all that. And even down to the continuing education courses that you choose can help with the liability if you get sued, because it shows that you've kept up to date on what you possibly are being sued about. So it's just some of those conversations. I'm sure Canada does not have this mishmash of problems like the US has, but it's just very interesting learning from how you guys run things, and learning about these caveats of people that maintain their certification but aren't actively on the clinical side. But that's kind of, like you said, the basis of an athletic therapist or athletic trainer is the life-saving support and response on the sideline.
yeah, and I'm not entirely sure the reasons behind that. I'd have to go back and talk to somebody who's been around and part of the CATA board, in and out, for since it became a thing, right? Or
Yeah.
for the last while, anyways. And I mean, you made a point there about keeping up to date on your information. So there was a point in my athletic therapy career where I didn't have to maintain my CPR every year. I could do it every 3 years or every 2 years. It was something weird like that. And so it wasn't mandated to do it yearly. And one of my profs from university who teaches the first aid, first responder courses kind of said, well, if something happens and you get sued because something happened in a field setting, if you don't have your first aid every year, you're more likely to get sued. Whereas if you do it every year and you keep up with your education, then it'll look better for your case.
Defending
right?
yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. Which, is the other part of maintaining your certification. You do have to have liability insurance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of a debate too at this point, is it's not necessarily required for you to have personal liability insurance for your certification, but how people get around that is because their employer provides the liability protection. But the caveat to that is they can drop you at any time, depending on how crazy the lawsuit is or whatever. I don't think they have to defend you with their malpractice or liability insurance. So right now it's really trying to get the word out of athletic trainers really need to protect themselves as an individual, and spend the extra maybe $200 to get a professional malpractice and what's the third one? I think liability insurance. So it's like a 3-prong approach, which I do think should be required to maintain your certification. But we're all individuals here in the US, I guess. You watch out for as much as you want to for yourself.
Yeah, and really, I mean, does it matter if you spend an extra $200-300 on insurance when the outcome could be millions of dollars, right? Like if you
Yeah.
don't have that. So it's silly to not have professional liability insurance and to rely on somebody else, because I mean, the further I get into just, and not even just athletic therapy, right? But the further I get into other things, I start to realize that you can't rely on other people.
No.
Rely on yourself. You can only control the things you do. You can't control what other people do. So,
Yeah.
for
And
$300, just you're covering your ass, right? Like,
yeah. And that's the thing was when I was at an institution, we had a change of head athletic trainer. So she came in and started checking all the paperwork and stuff. And she's like, we don't really have specific liability covering the athletic trainers directly. And I was like, what? Like, so I would recommend that if you are being covered by your company, that you need a copy of their liability insurance to make sure that you are actually covered. And
that's crazy.
what the details actually say too. So otherwise just go get your own freaking liability insurance. Like it makes your life much easier if you want to do per diem or other things in life. So
Yeah, that's crazy.
yeah.
I feel like it's one of those things that just needs to be an obvious, just do it.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Hey, listeners, ever find yourself on the sidelines needing that one crucial item? Look no further than Nexus Sports Medicine. Nexus is your go-to partner for creating comprehensive medical kits and accessories tailored for athletic trainers in any setting. From high school fields to professional arenas, Nexus has you covered. These kits are designed by an athletic trainer with meticulous organization, ensuring that you're always prepared, no matter the situation. Stay ahead of the game with Nexus Sports Medicine and keep your athletes safe and thriving. Check out Nexus Sports Medicine at nexus-sportsmed.com. That's Nexus, NEXUS-sports, SPORTSMED.com to find out more and get your perfect gear today.
So job wise, obviously you guys have athletic sports coverage, and then as you had mentioned before, you guys go into private practice quite regularly. Are there any other settings that you guys are involved with?
Yeah, so the clinic, the field, those are the primary, and then you can see athletic therapists in sports injury clinics. It's starting to become more popular that they'll be kind of like a physician assistant. So a client or patient comes into the sports injury clinic, they get assessed by the athletic therapist, they pass the information on to the physician, and then the physician does their assessment and talks with the patient. So that's starting to become more popular. You'll see athletic therapists in casting clinics, in insurance, as an educator at the university level, or in continuing education courses. But those are kind of the main areas that you'll see athletic therapists. I'm sure there's other options out there,
Yeah.
but not as popular.
So you had talked about physiotherapist. Is that technically physical therapist like in the US, or what is the difference between a athletic therapist and a physiotherapist in Canada?
Yes. I forgot that it's not physiotherapy in the US. It is physical therapist in the US. It's essentially the same thing. Physical therapist and physiotherapist are the same thing. Just again, it would be like athletic therapy and athletic training. So there's
Yeah.
probably some little differences, but for the most part, it's the exact same thing. So the differences between athletic therapy and physiotherapy, what I tell clients is just it's really based on continuing education. But at the base level, so when we graduate university, you're not going to find a physiotherapist in a field setting. They would have to take continuing education courses in order to be able to do that and be covered by their liability insurance. And you're not going to find an athletic therapist in a hospital.
Okay.
You'll find a physio in a hospital, but you likely won't find an AT in a hospital. I think that's starting to change too. But at the base level, athletic therapists are the biggest difference is that ATs have a larger understanding on getting our athletes and clients back to sport and
Okay.
back to their athletics and highest level of athletics, right? Whereas physiotherapy at a base level don't get clients back to their elite activities. They get them back to their functional activities. Now, you will see a lot of physiotherapists working with sports, and you will see a lot of physiotherapists who have the abilities to get clients back into their sports and activities, but that's because they've taken that education to move from, let's do our basic tubing exercises for the shoulder,
Yeah.
to here's our more sports specific exercises.
Yeah. And in the US, they have like fellowships to be able to qualify to work with that demographic a little bit closer. And they are starting to do like emergency care classes here. So be on the lookout. We have to watch out.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And this is just based off of my understanding, right? Like I don't know enough about physio in Canada, but
Yeah.
that's just my basic understanding of that.
Yeah. Well, that's usually when athletic trainers are looking, like in Europe and stuff, we hear physios, and that's usually the closest thing that athletic trainers are associated to. So it's interesting that you guys have physiotherapists there and the athletic therapists. So I think it's just asking a few more follow-up questions when we're asking, what does sports medicine look like in other countries? So just kind of interesting. So if I wanted to come over to Canada and practice, what does that look like?
Yeah, so it's the same thing as if I wanted to come down to the US. So essentially, you would apply to be a temporary international candidate, and there's a fee with that. There's a $50 fee Canadian. And then which is just, nothing if you're from the US.
Aren't they called loons or something?
Loonies. They are called loonies. We still
Okay.
call it $1, but
Well,
the Canadian term would be a loony.
okay.
I guess the loon. Do you know what a loon is? Like the
Yeah, it's a
animal?
bird.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because we get your loonies in Alaska all the time, so it always gets confused with the American quarter and then a Canadian loony. So, because it has a loon on it.
But it's gold. How does that get confused with a quarter?
Maybe that's not. I don't know. I thought I saw there was silver ones at one point. Maybe that was Minnesota or something that had loons on their quarter, but I don't know. We'd get loonies at some point in Alaska. I remember talking about them, and they were worth a little bit less.
A little. The U.S. does not accept Canadian bills.
Well, Alaska and Canada are best friends, so we just pay under the table.
Yeah, as your dad was saying, you speak hockey.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So you pay your Canadian fees to the CATA, and then I guess there's a program or a group called the International Consultants of Delaware, ICD, and so you get directed to this website to complete a credential evaluation process. And then again, there's a fee. This one is $275 USD. And then after that, you're prompted to provide documentation. So the documentation that you need is 2 notarized identity documents, so driver's license, passport, marriage license, official transcripts from your post-secondary accredited institution, a signed education form from the registrar of your academic institution from which you graduated, and a signed certification form from your certifying organization to show that you're a member in good standing. So really, you just have to be a real person, and you have to have graduated and maintained your certification. And then you can send your documentation with some money into the CATA and the ICD, and then they'll review it and tell you whether or not you followed the rules appropriately. And then you can apply for the CATA exam.
Okay.
And at some point in there, you have to apply to be part of the CATA, which again comes with fees. Applying for the exam comes with fees. And then once you take the exam, which is, I believe if you're coming in, it would just be the national exam now is just that, 300 multiple choice questions in 3 hours. And so you take the exam, you wait until you hear back, and then if you pass, then I guess you're certified athletic therapist in Canada.
Awesome. Well, maybe I didn't look as deeply into Canadians coming to the U.S., but you guys do your background checks on us. It's like you don't trust us or something.
I actually think it might be the same way going to the US.
Oh,
So
okay.
the same kind of idea where you have to send, like, prove that you're a real person.
Yeah.
But I think that's to prove not just that you're a real person, but to match your transcripts, right? So to match your transcripts to a person,
Yeah.
because going to the US, you have to prove that you are part of a
You are certified
association
already.
and you're certified.
Yeah.
And then I think it's the same kind of idea from there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I don't think I did as much background as you. So I was like, oh, I thought you just could show the certification. You know, they'll let you know if you can take the test. I don't even know what the fees were to take it.
Your body is the most important instrument you have to perfect your craft, and it's important to keep it in top form. As To The Bone's official recovery partner, Rapid Reboot Recovery Products can help you do this. With their best-in-class pneumatic compression devices, you can customize your recovery settings to help your body perform its best. Get yours today with the To The Bone 15% discount code. That's right. Visit rapidreboot.com, rapidreboot.com, and enter the code ToTheBone15 to get your 15% discount.
This was if somebody's interested in working in Canada as an athletic therapist, then this was laid out super easily on the CATA website, which is athletictherapy.org. Was the website that I had found this from. I have that written down. Yeah, it was just laid out in a really nice, easy to follow with all the links plugged in. So,
yeah.
But I do know that if your team is covering you and you're working in Canada for a short period of time, so say you're working with a US team and you come up to Canada, as long as you're only working with your team, you're still qualified to work in Canada with your team.
Yeah, a temporary practice.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
yeah. I don't believe you have to apply for anything separate from that.
Yeah, and I think that's the same way over here too. Is as long as you're with your organization and hired through your organization, working with your athletes, you should be totally fine.
Yeah, and have your liability insurance.
Yes, make sure to check if it covers international work too.
Yeah.
Well, what else is there to talk about Canadian athletic therapy?
I don't know. I think you covered all of it. I think that was kind of all the things athletic therapy and athletic training.
Yeah. Well, I guess if you want to learn about athletic trainers going to Canada, go on to Ashley's podcast, Athletic Therapy Now. We posted that a few weeks ago. So if you want to work in Canada full time, that's a good way to learn what the differences are and what to expect ultimately. And then, check out the BOC or CATA on how to transfer your certification ultimately.
Yeah, and I'm always happy if somebody has questions, they're welcome to reach out to me. But really, the best place to reach out would be to the CATA. My perspective is just my perspective. Like I said, I'm not part of the CATA or the Manitoba Association. So this is just me as a little athletic therapist hanging out in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and this is my viewpoint of being in this athletic therapy world for quite some time now. So I could be misunderstood with some of the things that I said. I could be misunderstanding them. So always check with your local association.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, and I just think it's interesting. I think athletic training is at a interesting point in the US, and I think it's just kind of taking in information from how other specialties, other athletic therapists are doing things, and how can we incorporate that into our practice to maybe make it a little bit easier. I mean, the insurance portion we've been pushing for a while, third-party reimbursement, and even the continuing education was different in that, like, having different allotted hours to accredited and non-accredited. Here, the hours are the same. You just have to categorize it, and it might get audited is the biggest thing here. So very interesting. It's always good to have a different perspective when you're trying to grow and make things better. So I'm very happy to have you on and learn more.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And on the insurance side of it, sorry, you just said something there that made me think about it. There's that push was done provincially. So in Manitoba, we've had a really great association. Our Manitoba Association has been super supportive, and I don't know if it's the people that we've had on our provincial board. I don't know if it's just the size of our community. Manitoba is a fairly, we're not the smallest province, but we're kind of in the middle between the smallest province for athletic therapists that are here and, you know, the largest province. And I think if you have too many people and too large of an area to work with, it becomes difficult. But if you have, you know, a smaller area to work with, I mean, we're in Winnipeg, we're in the capital of Manitoba, and capital, is it called capital when it's provincial? I really need to work on my elementary school geography. And so I think it was part of who we had here in Manitoba working towards these things, and our geography of where we're all laid out, and where all of those, you know, the insurance companies are all in Winnipeg, for the Manitoba insurance companies. And so being able to chat with them and get that relationship going where they start to recognize athletic therapy. Like, it took time and it took a lot of hard work, but that was really just provincial and the therapists who took on that job to get that done.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's where we're struggling a little bit in the U.S. as we think that our national association should be in charge of some of those things, which it's 50 states, it's 55,000 athletic trainers that they're overseeing. They're just trying to make sure that the profession of athletic training is protected. There's no big problems. Otherwise, you need to go to the state or even, well, the district's not really, but the state or your regional associations to get these things pushed along if you want to see change in your geographical area. It's easier, like you said, to make change in small numbers rather than the wide swoop over everyone, because that takes forever. Not everybody's going to like it. And usually it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, so you just said something there which made me had to pop on and Google a number here. You said 55,000 athletic trainers in the U.S. I Googled how many athletic therapists are in Canada. Do you want to take a guess?
I don't want to be mean, but I'm thinking between 5 and 10,000. That's a wide shot.
Over 3,000 certified and candidate members.
Wow. Do you know what the population of Canada is? Let's search it.
Yeah. 40 million in 2023.
Okay.
So that number surprised me. I thought it would have been more athletic therapists, but I mean, that just goes to show in Canada we're working with 3,000 athletic therapists versus the US where there are 55,000, right? That's a huge change in numbers, and and that's a lot of people to work with. So you're going to have more tiers in, you know, in what's going on there. And in Canada, with our small amount of 3,000 athletic therapists, you know, you have each province. I think I was looking into it. I think Saskatchewan, which is our neighbor, I think they have like less than 30 athletic therapists in Saskatchewan, right? Like, I had asked a friend of mine who was up in the Yukon, if there's ATs up there, and she was like, "Oh, I found one." She sent me a link to one athletic therapist in the Yukon.
Well, that's in Alaska. I mean, there's 70 certified athletic trainers registered, but then one of the other athletic training podcasts just interviewed someone from Alaska, and they're like, well, we think it's really closer to like 35 active athletic trainers. But I mean, we only have 450,000 people in the state of Alaska too. So, you know.
Yeah.
lot of land for a little amount of people too. So
Yeah, and that's most of Canada, right? A lot of land for a small amount of people.
well, most of it's too frozen to do anything on. So
Okay, what is our temperature today? Our temperature, I'm looking it up here, and it's been like this, I'm going to say almost 2 weeks now, and I think we have another week of it. In Winnipeg, Manitoba, it is minus 24 degrees Celsius.
so that's like I think close to it's negative 11 Fahrenheit. So, I think my dad was saying it was about 30 this morning in Kenai, so not too bad. Yeah. Fahrenheit.
30 Fahrenheit, and we're minus 11 Fahrenheit?
Yeah. So yeah, let's
cold.
see.
What's cold here?
So it's negative 1 in Kenai in Celsius. Not too bad.
Yeah. I think it was minus 30 here Celsius this morning when I woke up. So it's warmed up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. I have to just look up Fairbanks because that's always...
Well, in the summer, we have days where we get to plus 30 and it can stay there for a while. And I don't know, again, what that is Fahrenheit. That's got to be 80, 90?
Yeah. What'd you say it was?
30 Celsius.
86 degrees. That's pretty good.
Well, there we go.
I was just saying, like, Fairbanks, it gets to, like, negative 30 Fahrenheit. And then in the summers, it's, like, 80, 90s. And, they're right in the middle, so they get all the sun.
Yeah, well, and I think at some point, the Celsius and Fahrenheit numbers meet.
Yeah. I'm not that good at math, but,
That's okay.
I just know 32 degrees is 0 degrees Celsius, so that's all I know.
So yes, it is too frozen in the winter months. In the summer months, it's beautiful.
Yeah. I always tell everybody, come in the summer. Come in the summer. But, well, thank you so much for being on. If you want to learn more about athletic therapy in Canada, follow Athletic Therapy Now with your host, Ashley Burr, who we have on today. I'm hoping to have more international sports medicine providers on so we can get a better idea of how do we spread the word of sports medicine and provide better care to everybody. And then what platforms are you on so people can follow you?
Yeah, so the best place to follow me would be on Instagram. I have a couple of different Instagram handles. So my athletic therapy, or Ashley Burr Athletic Therapy, is the one that I just post most of my clinical stuff on. I have Athletic Therapy Now, which is the podcast, and then I have Burr myofascial cupping, I think. You know what? It's terrible. I don't even know. I have a cupping one somewhere. And so I'm pretty active on all of those. So best place to reach out is Ashley Burr Athletic Therapy. You can also email me, ashley@burrathletictherapy.com. That's the only way of communicating with me that is guaranteed not to get lost. I am on Facebook, same thing, just my name, and I'm on YouTube, Ashley Burr Athletic Therapy, and Shelby's trying to convince me to join LinkedIn and actually be active on it. So we'll see where that goes.
Great, more conversation. And then you have a website too, correct?
I do, yeah, burrathletictherapy.com.
Okay, perfect.
So Burr as in B-U-R-R, it's because that's my last name, not because I live in a very cold climate.
Man, you could have done so much with the marketing on that. Well, thank you so much. And hopefully we'll have you on soon again. I don't know what topic we'll hit, but I'm sure we will come up with something.
Sounds good. So, looking forward to it. Thank you.
That's it for today's episode of To the Bone. I hope we've sparked some new thoughts, challenged your perspectives, or simply reminded you to dig a little deeper. Remember, life isn't just about what's on the surface. Sometimes you've got to cut deeper and get to the bone of what really matters. To the Bone podcast is a product of Daly LLC. It's hosted and produced by Shelby Daly, ATC, and Randy Daly. No clinical decision-making should be based solely on one source. While care is taken to ensure accuracy, factual errors can be present. For more on the show, visit www.tothebonepodcast.com. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Get involved in the conversation. You can find us at www.tothebonepodcast.com. Drop us topic suggestions or be a potential guest. We're all about connecting with you, our listeners. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and keep cutting deep.